Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for USports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics setting up the USports semi-finals from across the league. We have all but 8 teams left in the nation. Did I do my math right there? Absolutely not. It's 16. This is why I don't teach math. We'll talk about those games. We'll talk about the USports top 10 and so much more. That was such bad math there. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Hey, you don't teach math for a reason here, my man, but I'm always doing well, especially when we've got semifinal weekend. I'm on the road for this with my own job, so if I look or sound a little bit different for the folks on YouTube, that's why, but nothing's going to keep me from getting together with Zach and helping to preview these games.
You look and sound just as beautiful as always. And Tom, let's start off with the U Sports top 10 came out. Well, we're recording it a bit earlier in the week than we typically do. At the time of recording, it came out today on the 27th. Happy birthday, Dad. Top 10 goes as follows. Laurier, Laval, Sask, Montreal, St. Mary's cracking into the top 5. Love to see that. Queens, Regina, Western, Windsor, St. FX. Tom, to my eyes, I don't see them showing like the next group of players in the mix here. Don't want to get too in the weeds about it. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of folks that are saying, well, Western's out, so what are they still doing in there? But nonetheless, what do you make of this list here?
I mean, I think it's a relatively solid list. I would have liked to have seen another team jump in there rather than having Western just slide a little bit further down just for exactly like that reasoning. But in the grand scheme of things, I think that Western could still beat a lot of these teams, despite the fact that they lost to a 3-5 Guelph team that is a much better Guelph team than just 3-5. I still do think that this is a really good Western football team that could beat a lot of the other teams. So while I would have liked to have seen another team like I mentioned, I don't really hate it all that much.
Yeah, I don't know who you'd be kicking out. I don't know who you'd be making the case for, because on the one hand, like, is it Guelph? Probably not over these teams. Like, it's that weird thing of like, well, they just beat Western, but are they better than Western? Leave it up to you to decide that one. And then Ottawa had their bounce back performance, but they still lost. So now you're back in that same position of, do you put a team that's out? You know, so we're running out of teams here that really matter at this stage in the season. So the list is what it is. I feel like Windsor should be a bump or two higher than they are currently, but those are your U Sports top 10. Not too much to say on that matter. So let's make our way to the end of the 401 under the shadow of the Golden Arches, a little town called Little Rock, Arkansas, Wind City, Windsor, Ontario, under the guidance, the tutelage, the mentorship, the coaching prowess of one JP, the Don, Sir Selly. The Windsor Lancers are getting set to take on the Queen's Golden Gales in a rematch from, what was it, 2 weeks ago? And also a rematch from last year's quarterfinals, also from Windsor, a game in which Queens nearly eked out a victory on a Logan Walton last-second touchdown. Windsor's second time in the semifinals in 3 years. For Queens, obviously, they started off the decade going to multiple Yates Cups and are trying to earn their way back there last year, falling to a Laurier team in Kitchener-Waterloo in a tightly contested ball game. Tom, these teams are so evenly matched. We saw Windsor pick up the win 2 weeks ago, 31-28 in Kingston, a game that still didn't see Justin Pace, but saw that pass rush as deadly as ever for those Windsor Lancers. This game is going to be so electric. It is going to be the classic. Even if you pick up the win, you're not coming out there without your own collection of bruises, bumps, and scars from it. What do you make of this colossal matchup we have in our hands coming out of Windsor?
Man, how lucky are we that we get a chance to see these teams again? Yes, they're traveling down to, well, Queens is traveling down to Windsor, but it's been a very long time since the Windsor Lancers have hosted a Yates Cup semifinal playoff game. And to think that they're doing that against a team in Queens that they have had a number of unbelievable games and finishes against is really just outstanding to see. I think that while the smart money would be able to just say, well, you know, Windsor traveled to Kingston here and they beat them in their house, surely they're going to do it again. This is a Windsor Lancer team that ran all over these Queens Gales but without one Justin Pace. And you can look at us and say, well, there's 11 other guys on the field here. How much does one guy really make the difference? Well, you saw that last week when Pace had a career game after being out for 3 games. And I think he's going to bring a whole lot more to this defense. I still think Wavy Mumbo, Andrew Delaney, and Liam Talbot really do their thing for Windsor. They're great at being a 3-back system, but don't expect them to have the same level of production on the ground that they did.
Most definitely. I do think it's fair to say that in the case of Talbot and Delaney, they're both getting better every week that they've been back from injury. We saw obviously Talbot with that beautiful touchdown late in their game against Ottawa last week. Delaney, not huge numbers, but some clutch first downs where he could. And obviously with Mambo, again, just continuing to stamp himself as one of the best running backs we have, not only in the province, but in the country. From the Queen side of things, because we can say all we want about what Pace does in coming back for that defense. And, if your defense is playing better, it supports your special teams, it supports your offense the same way that any of those units support the other. But a big piece from that first matchup, and I think this goes into one of our comments we made coming off of the Queen's victory against Mac, was that for starters, this pass rush for Windsor, they're able to get to Vreeken 4 times on the day, making him very uncomfortable. He's a bit under 50% on the day in his passing percentage, 201 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Kasari on the ground held just over 100 yards. And then as a reflection of that, I think this is where we saw how when Queens is able to establish their run game, then get into their read option looks, those play action RPOs, whatever it might be, and then possibly start to take those deep shots, that's when they are supremely deadly. When you look at what we saw from Queens against Mac last week and how Windsor was able to stifle their run game, relatively speaking, 2 weeks ago, is the emphasis for Windsor to be able to say, look, we need to slow down Kasari and force Vreeken to beat us without the play action looks? Or is the thought process, well, you know what? We can get home with 4 without overcommitting into the box, and we can trust our guys in the young buck and Piccioni in the middle, all the support from Dylan Simpson, and then that host of halfbacks and the likes of Ethan John, so on and so forth, to be able to fill in on the run. They can get after the quarterback with just 4. We know that. Do they have to commit a little bit more to slow down the run? And as a result of slowing down the run, do they therefore slow down the pass? Or do they say we can get to the quarterback with few guys so we don't need to overload and just make sure that they are just running into the teeth of our defense that can handle Kasari with just 7, maybe 8 guys supporting?
Well, I think honestly, when you look at both of the questions or both the scenarios that you kind of posed, it comes down to the same thing. How well can this Windsor defensive line continue to play? Because in both scenarios here, Braxton Johnson, Liam Haas, Amon Taylor, everybody on that D line was really playing some of their best ball here in order to limit all of those. Now, I think if you're looking at this, and especially after watching the Queens McMaster game, I think the best option here is to stop the run and force Vreeken to really throw, because once that run game gets established, we saw so many times that power read where they're ripping it out to an X receiver screen or just a wide receiver screen. Because of that run fake or the other play actions, like there's so much that comes off of the run when it's done successfully that I think if you outright take that away, while Vreeken and the rest of this receiving core can be very dangerous, you take away an entire facet of what that offense looked like, not just on the ground, but in the air as well. So I think if Windsor can commit to limiting Kasari again, making sure that he stays under 100 yards and is not that big of a factor into this game, you seriously take away a lot of the variation that Queens is able to do in the air, as well as what they want to do on the ground.
Now, like these two teams, again, the matchup is so similar in the comparison, because on the one hand, I want to throw you not the exact same question, but set up in terms of how Queens is going to look to stifle Windsor from the standpoint of, we obviously know that run game is so effective for them, starting with Mambo and adding in Talbot and Delaney. But as we started to see over the last couple of weeks, and especially in that game against Ottawa, we know Domofsky has got some good athleticism, and that though if he's just sitting back in the pocket, scanning the defense, might not be your best option, but them using him in some of those RPO looks for him to then run is then lightening up the box to then help support the run that much more, and then opening up some of those passes he can make on the run. Obviously, we trust this Queens defense against anyone in the league. I can't remember off the top of my head whether Windsor was using those RPOs, those zone reads as much against Queens, or if it really just came out mostly. I think they did a bit, but if it came out just more so against Ottawa, we saw Queens use a lot of those 30 fronts against Mac. Obviously, when you have the linebackers, they do, and especially Justin Pace, who can just go sideline to sideline and just be on the prowl, shedding blocks left, right, and center. You can kind of just trust him to be able to read that run to the quarterback keep. But how do you see Queens trying to attack them? We certainly know that if they man it up on the back end, that yes, we like some of these receivers. We like a lot of these receivers for Windsor, but the matchups are just really tough with those DBs. How do you see them playing not just the run and the running prowess of Mambo, but also being able to take on the fact that Domofsky is just as likely to pull that ball out of the belly and take it out wide?
Yeah, I think when you go into this, you start looking at all of the different possibilities for this Windsor defense, or sorry, this Queens defense and what they can do. And yes, they do a lot of that 30 front with Capea, Eric Johnson, and with Oliver Jackson, but there have been a number of times where they bring down Jacob Baldwin, or even do something with Jeremy Hiscox, and they bring them up on the line to create that kind of 40 front look, and they bump in one of those DNs. I think when you're going up against a team like Windsor, and we've mentioned this a few times, but that is a massive hulking offensive line that's up front there. If you crowd bodies right up at the point of attack on the line, you're playing into their strength, because once big boys like Brett Miller and the rest of that offensive line get their mitts on you, you're not making that play anymore. So I think actually being in that true 30 front and allowing those linebackers to use their speed to their advantage and get around guys is actually in Queens' favor going into this one. So I expect to see a lot of 30 front here for that exactly that reason, and almost to tempt Windsor into trying to run the ball against this team. And once they're able to sniff that out and to potentially stop it, I think Queens' entire game plan going into this is going to be saying, I'm going to force Nick Domofsky to try to beat us. And we've talked about how good the entirety of that Windsor receiving core is, with Kareem Cotton, Tyreek Quason, Colby Ginn, and the rest of them. But thrown into the defense of Asher Miller-Milan's son, of Jared Seaway, of Ian St. Arnaud, Keegan Vanek, like that's the teeth of arguably the best defensive secondary that we have in the OUA, potentially in USports. So for sure, I know Coach McManus is going into this saying, yeah, we're going to send some blitzes. We're going to make sure that guys are being flexible here and that Justin Pace can really go off. But the whole idea here is that we're going to dare Domofsky to try to beat us through the air, because as we've talked about, the vast majority of the games that he has played, he's thrown for, 180, 160 yards on average, maybe a touchdown and an interception type deal. And you just can't afford to make those kind of mistakes, or to even one interception against a team like Queens, because as we saw last week, they can easily take one of those interceptions back for 7, and now you're fighting from an even bigger deficit here. So I expect this Queens defense to commit to stopping the run, but by doing it out of a 34.
Well, and the opposite is true for Windsor, because we saw these teams in their regular season matchup from last year where it's them doing to Queens what Queens did to Mac, picking him off freaking, I think it's 4 times, 2 of which in the hands of Bobby Springer. I don't think any of them were taken back to the house. I think Ethan John picked up one. So again, just ball hawking secondaries, massive run stopping front sevens who can also rush the passer, running backs who can get you 130 to 150 seemingly with ease, and quarterbacks, in Vreekin that you would take in the draft above Domofsky, but who, especially when they can utilize that run to pass look in there, can play above those averages. Again, it feels like the Spider-Man meme with these two teams, and what's making it such a great matchup where, again, Windsor beats them in that first matchup last year. Queens narrowly beats them on the road last year. Windsor goes into Queens, picks up the win, as we saw 2 weeks ago, and then we have this matchup coming up. I mean, Tom, we literally were talking about this matchup 2 weeks ago. Not all that much has changed other than the fact that Pace is back in this game. That's a 3-point win for the Windsor Lancers on the road. I'll leave it up to you if there are any other sort of data points, themes, intangible aspects that you want to cover. But otherwise, I mean, again, we were setting up the same matchup not too long ago, save for the absence of Justin Pace. Anything else that you want to say on this matchup?
Yeah, well, you go back to exactly like you were mentioning how similar these teams are. I mean, the makeup of that both D lines, the linebacking core, and even the defensive secondary. We mentioned guys like Asher Miller Melanson and Keegan Vanek, but how about Robert Springer, Estevan Dotsi, and the rest of those guys for Windsor and all of this stuff? I think both defenses are playing at the very highest of levels in this one. But I think the difference that comes down to it for me is the offense. And I think with Justin Pace back in, they limit that Windsor run game and Vreeking finds his rhythm. Queens takes this one on the road to get back to the Yates Cup for the first time since 2022.
Oh, I love the pick, and you might have to help me out with the historical aspect of it. But I'm gonna go with the Dawn and the blue collar gold swagger to take care of business at home with the Windsor Lancers. As much as well, I mean, if the Blue Jays take care of the Dodgers before it gets to Game 7, then I don't have to worry about it. As much as I would love to be watching a Game 7 of the World Series, I'm hoping it's wrapped up before then so I can be along with you in the house, because either way, it's an absolute bloodbath we have on our hands and a game that's going to be so exciting. But if there does happen to be a Game 7, then I will be heading to Kitchener-Waterloo to take in the Week 1 rematch that we have on our hands. My Guelph Griffins, or let me do it properly. My Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins, taking on the Yates Cup champions and presumptive champions to do it all again, and possibly even at this point, the Vanier favorites in the Laurier Golden Hawks, coming off the Week 1 bye, coming off their absolute beatdown of the Western Mustangs. Tom, this was a matchup from Week 1 that we were so excited about. In some ways, it lived up to the hype because of the comeback that Guelph put together. We were in the house for that one. Laurier comes off on a rip-roaring start. They get the 3-score lead in that one early. Guelph marches back with 3 unmatched scores in the third quarter, and they just can't finish the job. We see in that one Todd Stones Galloway going to the double tight formation, grinding out the clock in the late third into the fourth quarter. And they come away late on the back of some really strong performances. Now, this was a version of Laurier that really hadn't just let Cal Wither loose. He still ends up 18 for 28, 243, and 3 touchdowns, one of which is that little dump off, quick out to Ethan Jordan, who then turns it up for, I believe, the long of 69 yards and the touchdown that he had on that day. But overall, like when I think about this matchup, who these teams are and where they were, for one, it's a Guelph team that, though they've gotten healthier, still overall has been marred by injury. I don't know if you know anything about Ethan Pyle, whether we're going to see him back. That's obviously a massive piece in it. But a team in Laurier that I'm sure I'm missing something in the mix. We know that they didn't have in the middle, Marcus Tenney. They didn't have Marcus Tenney in this game. He's attending his sister's wedding, I believe it was. So obviously they're improved in that regard, but overwhelmingly, and obviously, Dollywall's been hurt for darn near the whole year. So again, not that they haven't had been bitten by the injury bug a bit either, but a Laurier team that on the whole has been pretty healthy, all things considered. A Guelph team that's been beaten up, but and then on the flip side as well, a Laurier team that's really allowed Cal Wither to just come out of his shell as he's grown more comfortable in the system with the live bullets flying. A tight game from Guelph in Week 1. This one in Kitchener-Waterloo, a rested Laurier team that's now only gotten more and more explosive, looking like that 2024 version of themselves. What is your early take on this matchup?
You talk about two teams that are coming off of historic runs. I mean, like we mentioned last week, Guelph being the first ever number 7 team to win in a playoff matchup because of the inception in 2022, and Laurier arguably looking better this year than they did last year. How the hell that's possible, I have no idea, but they really look strong and amazing. And again, like you said, this last game was the very first game of the season between these two clubs, and one you and I were in person for. And this was Cal Wither's first ever experience throwing for Laurier and back in the Canadian game in a number of years. And his numbers on the day, 18 for 28, 243 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. I mean, that's pretty outstanding for a guy that had spent a lot of time down south and done a lot of worked in order to get ready for this. We see an example out west of one Drew Viotto, who's going through something very similar here, and it took him a number of games in order for him to really find his groove in the Canadian game, and for Cal to do it almost right off the hop is truly incredible here. So to see Cal Wither going up against this Guelph defense, fully ready to go, having fully assimilated into the Canadian game. I don't know the status of Gianni Green. I don't know the status of Ethan Pyle. Now, there's a number of guys in this one where if they come back from injury, they could certainly help out the Griffin cause because they are going to need every single body they can in order to go up against this Laurier squad that is humming on all cylinders. And let's not forget, while they are coming off of a bye, they had one of their most dominant performances, period, against the Western Mustangs to lead into that. So I would say they're still riding a bit of a high.
Well, and for Guelph too, not knowing the status of Donovan Malloy at the time of recording, and maybe you'll remind the folks and myself while you're at it of that stat you came across a week or so ago about their record with and without him. And again, pretty staggering numbers. For the Laurier side of things, I'll add in as well. Josh Connor's been dealing with some injuries this year as well. Nothing to sneeze at, nothing to overlook, because we did see that despite the injury to Ethan Pyle, despite not having Malloy in there, despite Caleb Sargent being limited as big as he was not being in the game last week, we talk about seeing guys like Cal Wither sort of finally coming to his own. I love the Drew Viotto comp. We did see Isaiah Smith against that Western front really start to look like the guy that we know and we've seen him be, of that ground and pound, run you over type dude, and then be able to sort of facilitate outward from that. Now, one of the things I am kind of, thinking about in terms of things where Guelph has some opportunities, assuming that Laurier doesn't make the adjustments to their own, is I'm when we're watching that Western game last week, and we're seeing that, Aboud's taking some shots downfield. He's, hits on a couple big looks. One where he hits a receiver in the hands is a tough catch, doesn't come down with it. But that what made them so successful and what made his game stand out to us as the player of the week was that he's going through his reads. He's keeping the drive alive, or keeping the play alive with his feet that he does so well. One of the most athletic quarterbacks we have. And then oftentimes finding Isaiah Smith into the flats as that sort of check down option there. And as we were talking about, Western was really in that blanket coverage. I remember watching that and then reflecting upon it, knowing they're playing Laurier, and just thinking to myself what Arnaud Desjardins had told us in his, what is a slick little name drop there, when we were talking to Arnaud Desjardins. We're just super casual with it.
Bit of a humble brag, but whatever.
Yeah, no problem there. Just brush off the shoulders. That when him and his Rouge et Or squad took out Laurier last year, is that, and this again, what makes that such a professional organization there, is that if you're going to give them anything, they will just take it all day until you try and take that away, and then they'll just figure out where the other option is. And the thing that he had highlighted with Laurier is that, they have great tacklers on the back end. Obviously, we know Malik Cote, absolute dog. We know Jahari Hastings, absolute dog. And in the linebacking core, don't even get us started. But to me, I wonder whether or not Guelph will still have a lot of the success they had against Western, or be able to kind of go back to that, maybe even more intentionally than perhaps going through like second, third, fourth option type of reads, to be able to say, let's push the coverage deep, then let's get into our guys underneath in those middle ranges, even if we can, get the ball out quickly, and just trust that we can grind them out, and that the best thing we can do for our defense is, as an offense, just chunk out offensive first downs so we can keep Cal Wither and co off the field. Now, admittedly, it felt like Western tried to do something similar early on in that game against them, looking at some quick outs and just trying to not go for those big knockout balls, because the longer that ball's in the air, the longer time you have for these, ball hawking secondary players, add in Ethan Bayfield, Owen Getz, along with the guys that we were mentioning already. Paul Legali's played a really nice role for them this season to then come up with those big splashy plays. But I wonder to myself, thinking about what Desjardins had mentioned about how he was able to effectively move the ball against Laurier consistently, with what we saw Guelph do against Western, what do you make of that aspect of the Guelph offense, Laurier defense matchup?
Yeah, this is a Laurier defense that has always had a bend but don't break kind of mentality, and I think they've really come up recently here and shown the dominance that they can have. But there's always, no matter how good a defense is, there's always going to be all areas where spots are open, whether that's in between zones, whether that's man beaters, whatever that looks like. And I think if Aboud can just consistently find those guys, and even in that Western game, it's not like they were scoring tons of points. I mean, they score 15 points in the fourth quarter alone to win that game. But the entire time, Aboud is finding guys down the field. He's moving the ball and he's flipping the field. So Western is constantly starting from their own end. And when you do that to an offense like Western, that is normally very high flying and very like one of the best scoring offenses, period, in the country. If you're able to consistently flip the field here, you give your defense the very best opportunity to stop or limit what is the most potent offense in all of U Sports. And I'd be willing to put that up against anybody.
No question. Not even close.
Yeah, it's not even close. So for this Griffin offense, I'm expecting the same. I'm expecting them to not necessarily force stuff. Certainly take a couple shots here and there just to make sure that Laurier knows they can to lighten up that box so that they can run the ball. But I'm expecting them to do a lot of good things here and just taking what's given. I think one of the most impressive areas of this Guelph Griffin team that we saw was in the fourth quarter for the first game against Laurier here, when Guelph is down 33-21 and Tristan Aboud gets the ball back and engineers a 9-play, 86-yard drive to score a touchdown and bring the game into 33-28 with 55 seconds left on the clock. Shout out. But he just, well, with the entire offense, I should say, gives them a chance to win the game against Laurier. And if not for a jump ball or an onside kick moment, they potentially could have. But it was in the face of a Laurier team that was still very dominant. Yes, Marcus Tenney wasn't there, but that's still a team that is one of the very best. And to do that in the time that you needed it most and to drive all the way down the field, I think that was really impressive. And I think if he can engineer something like that, and not even necessarily going down and scoring, but just consistently moving the ball, flipping the field, and making life as hard as possible for that Laurier offense, then Guelph has a real chance.
And if Guelph is able to pull this off, like it's going to come down to Aboud, McCray, and Smith on the offensive side of the ball, being able to pick up first downs on the ground. McCray, as we saw when he came into the game, and as you allude to, Aboud as well, using their legs when their receivers were out there, occupying the defensive secondary to open up passing lanes. To open up rush lanes for Aboud. The thing, though, that I'm thinking about as well, kind of looking at other versions of matchups against Laurier, is I'm thinking about last year's Yates Cup and how, as you've referenced so many times, that piece that Coach Greg Marshall's talked about, that Western not being a team that's built to play from behind, in which I believe Western struck first in that Yates Cup, but then Laurier offensively, they're so inevitable that at a certain point it forces you to play a type of offense that, again, I recognize I'm saying all this when we were in the house to watch Guelph put together that comeback. But when I think about, as we're saying, just taking what they give you at a certain point, my worry, and again, this is a Guelph defense that at times has shown to be very formidable. We talked about what a great day that Nicholas Parchenko had in the middle, helping to slow down Western offensively, and with Braden McDougall, Eunice Larry, some of these other linebackers there, they can, I don't put it past them that they can maybe slow down the three-headed monster of Jackson Scott and Bassick Haddon. But I think about how if this Laurier team, and frankly when this Laurier team gets up, because if Guelph wins, I don't think it's going to be just them sailing off the jump, or jumping out to a lead and just sailing from there, I should say. The question is, are they going to be in a position that they can be taking those dump off passes, chunking it down the field, trying to flip the field, to maybe do the field position battle? Or are they going to get a little antsy, and who could blame them if they did, where we're down a score? Okay, we're down 10. Okay, we're down 2 score. Whatever that situation is, we need to push the ball downfield. We saw them have some of those opportunities against Western, but I don't really want to start comparing the defensive secondaries between Western and Laurier, because it's again, no shot at Western, but this Laurier secondary is in a different class. To me, that's the thing, is not just whether Guelph can keep it close for the sake of being within a shot of winning it, but so they can continue to play a style of offense that is going to be the most effective for them to give them a shot to win it. Whereas if they get behind 2 scores, and again, I realize I'm saying all this having known that we were in the house to see them come back and nearly pick up the win, but for all sorts of reasons. It's now in Laurier's house. Laurier's coming off a bye. Cal Wither is that much better. All these things that make Laurier so much deadlier now, frankly, than they were at the start of the season. It's such a concern for me to think that, much like we saw Western being forced into a form of their offense that they're not their strongest at, that this Guelph team, with how we've seen them struggle, push the ball downfield with that receiving core, might be forced into that situation when Laurier again inevitably probably gets up a couple scores.
Yeah, when you talk about, yes, this Guelph team did come back against a Western squad, but this was a Western squad that allowed Guelph to hang around for so long. And I don't mean to say that as if, it was only Western playing bad and that's how Guelph was able to win this game. Of course, Guelph played really well here, but there was a number of times where Western is trying to get down the field and trying to score a touchdown because, yes, at one point in time they're down by 2 scores, but because it's only 2 scores, this is a Guelph team that always does better in the second half, and has a typically slow half and then really comes on in the second. I mean, in the first game against Laurier, they outscored the Golden Hawks 28-10 in the second half, and that's really where that came into play here. So I think that there's a lot of things that play into this, but typically, I'm not saying about this Laurier squad in particular because they are so explosive on offense, but typically speaking, the way that you get over the teams that have buys is to get on them quickly because there can be a little bit of rust. There can be a little bit of, yeah, we haven't played a game in a week. It's a little bit slower to come alive and how things are going. If you can get up to, a 7 or 10 point lead in that time, that gives you a little bit more time in order for something like that to happen. But I don't think that really plays into Guelph's strength because they've never been a team that really scores quickly in this. Now, you mentioned Marshall McCray, Tristan Buda, and Smith all needing to have big games. I think of the three of them, I think it's Isaiah Smith that needs to have the best game because in the first game, he finished with just 48 yards rushing on 8 attempts. Now, obviously, in the last game, he did a whole lot better and he was into the hundreds and looked really good in the passing game as well. I think he's going to have a game like that in order to really help them get through this and give Aboud another outlet pass and give another option on the run, whatever that looks like, because surely Laurier is going to be coming into this one knowing that Aboud and McCray are two of the best running quarterbacks that we have, and they have to have a response to that. I don't know how well you can have a response for a guy like Isaiah Smith, as big and strong as he is, as long as he plays like he is that big, strong back.
Now, we obviously gave a lot of flowers to the Guelph special teams unit, specifically that cover speed unit, on securing the game-winning Rouge last week to book them a ticket to Kitchener-Waterloo. We can talk about all the potential that Guelph has offensively with where they're at right now, the Ethan Pyle injury, the Donovan Malloy injury, the Caleb Sargent injury, and let's not pretend like we think that Aboud and McCray are anywhere close to fully healthy. Obviously none of these players are fully healthy at this stage in the season, but when they both dealt with, I think, lower body injuries early in the year and then have had to carry so much of the load for this team, it's just those guys are hurting. I don't necessarily see it when I watch it on the games. I'm not seeing them looking at a little gimpy or anything like that. It's just there's no way they aren't banged up. And
No,
we
of
look at
course.
this, of course, right? And this defense for Laurier, obviously, with Gregorczyk in the middle, with that front line, with Hastings, with La Quintana, with Tenney, and that secondary that we talked about, as good as Guelph has looked at times, you give them the edge there as well. But then last but not least, though, we gave a lot of flowers to the special teams unit, and deservingly so. We saw it really in this matchup here in week 1, where between these two teams, and we saw it last year as well, when Tayshawn Jackson really was the microcosm, the difference maker between the win and the loss for these two teams. Where on the special team side of things, I mean, you compare what's our guy's name? Trey Thompson to Dawson Hodge. Like that is several tiers apart in terms of that regards. And yeah, love our guy in Skywalker Guthrie, but you compare him to having, Tayshaun Jackson returning kicks, and then you look at what Leomi Ojatalayo does as a gunner and going downfield on their kick returns. Like the story of that game is so often the first half was the long field that Guelph was having to deal with. And I know you were saying that that could be part of the recipe, for how Guelph's able to slow down Laurier. But it almost certainly is going to be part of the recipe for what Guelph is going to have to deal with. Another just hill for them to have to climb. The special teams matchup in this game certainly swings to Lord Laurier's side as well, does it not?
Yeah, I think you have to give the edge to the Golden Hawks here. However, now that we're on the special teams, there was one person that I wanted to highlight last week or in the review pod here that I'm going to get a chance to do here. One of the best plays for the special teams came off of Guelph's punt team, where they forced that Braden Masseri fumble. It's picked up again by another Western Mustang and then fumbled again. And the man that I want to shout out is number 24, Nick Metron, because I can't remember which Western player it was that scooped up that ball after it was fumble. But so many times when you see something like that happen, there's just so much adrenaline. The ball's in the air and you can't help yourself. You're just going to tackle him and be done with it. Metron not only has the wherewithal to see what's happening here, to understand that somebody who is clearly not the returner has picked up the ball and is going to try to run with it. He comes over the top with a beautiful like tomahawk down on the ball, forces that fumble for Isaiah Smith to pick it up and give the ball to Guelph deep into Western territory here. So a shout out to Nick Metron for a phenomenal play. But they are going to need plays like that against a very good Laurier special teams because, as you mentioned here, this is a special teams unit that, coached up by Coach Robichaux, is operating at a very high level, and I put them up there with most other teams that are operating at that high level. And with the guys that you mentioned, how well they're playing with Tayshaun Jackson, anytime he touches the ball in any capacity, he can take it back. Let's not forget last year in the regular season, that was the ultimate deciding factor against the Guelph Griffins with Tayshaun Jackson's punt return touchdown in order to seal that win here. So they can easily come out with a huge play on any one of those special teams, and they're going to need Guelph's special teams to have their very best day that they've had all year.
So it's a few times now we're saying that triumvirate of McCrea, Abood, and Smith are going to have their best days. We know that this secondary for Guelph, though talented, is going to have their best days, their hands full with the best skill position unit any offense has to offer, and a Cal Wither who is night and day from who they saw in week one, and that was already a good Cal Wither. And on their special teams unit as well, Guelph having to have their best day. Doesn't sound good for my Griffins. Tom, I'm sitting here in my 10-year anniversary Yates Cup sweater. Any final thoughts, any other intangible or tangible pieces, X's and O's, Jimmy's and Joe's conversation pieces you want to add in? Because I feel like we've turned many and most of the stones at this point.
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about Guelph and that aspect of how well they're going to have to play because Laurier is this good. You know, there's a lot of times in previous years when you've gone back and forth and you're saying, okay, Laval's at one or Western's at one. Maybe there's some, back and forth about what can happen here. It, to me, is a very clear cut. Laurier is the best team in the country right now. And if they continue to play like that, Guelph is in for a very tough game. Probably the toughest of the season going into this one. And I think we haven't mentioned his name, but Ethan Jordan is going to have another big game in this one. His first game, 8 catches for 123 yards and 2 touchdowns, including that one damn near 70-yard scamper that was just a drag route that he was able to turn the corner and get upfield. So if no Gianni Green for this Guelph defense, that's going to be even tougher in order to limit him. And obviously we know, I think he's got the nickname now, Mr. November, in one Ryan Hughes with what he does in the postseason.
Aye.
He's incredible at what he can do, and obviously what he did against Western, but what he did last year coming in for a hurt Raiden Thorne. Like, this is a Laurier receiving core that I know we talk about a lot, but is easily the best in the country here. And with a banged up Griffin defense, you're going to have to do everything you can to put as much pressure as possible onto Cal Wither to limit him before he's able to make those throws. But again, that Laurier offensive line is really damn good too. So it's not like you're just going to be able to get there with four. This is a monumental task in front of the Griffins, and it's why I'm taking Laurier to beat them in this game and go on to their second consecutive Yates Cup.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Tom. I hate to pick against Guelph in this one. I love the idea of them just being this plucky underdog team. But at the end of the day, this is a team that went into the season where that shouldn't have been their mantra. They should have been playing a bit better than they have been this year, but they are where they are. I picture Laurier just defensively saying, keep a boot, keep McCray in the pocket, make him throw it downfield. Let them make mistakes. Don't let them extend plays with their feet and just squeeze them like a python, just going around its victim or what have you. And that offense with the play of those secondary guys, with how Cal's been looking and how that running game can supplement them. It's just I don't mean to say it's a bad matchup in specific. It's a bad matchup for literally anybody in the OUA. And Tom, of course, this is a team vying for their third straight Yates Cup here, appearance wise, of course. This team is no joke. They've been here, they've been in these moments. Yes, Guelph gave Western a nice fight last year in an OUA semifinal. This Laurier team is better than that squad they had to take on. And if I am there in the house for it, I will be loving the prospect of being proven wrong on this one, but I just don't see it coming to fruition, which of course, Tom, means that we are set. Oh no, we're on opposite sides of that pick. It's a Laurier hosted Yates Cup one way or the other based on our picks. The question will be whether it's the blue collar gold swagger of the Windsor Lancers or the tri-color royalty of the Queen's Golden Gales paying those Golden Hawks a visit. Tom, either way, these are two really exciting matchups. I hope that Guelph Laurier team game stays close throughout it. Let's take a look at the out of conference semifinal matchups. And the RSEQ ones have yet to be posted, but though I can't do much math, I can at least read a final standings to know that out of the RSEQ, we get McGill visiting Laval. We get Concordia visiting Montreal. Out in the AUS, they actually do have those games listed. Good for you, USports. We have St. Mary's hosting Acadia, and we have St. FX hosting Bishops. And then I thought they had the Can West ones up there. I guess they didn't. Out of the Can West, we have the UBC Thunderbirds visiting Saskatchewan and the Manitoba Bisons visiting the Regina Rams. Tom, where do you want to start in our USports Around the League breakdowns of those semifinals?
I think we always have to start where we typically do. We got to start out west for what will assuredly be another thrilling Hardy Cup journey, let's say.
Well, let's take it away. Let's start off with the Manitoba Regina matchup. Two squads, one in Manitoba with Xander Dachinsky just being on the shelf for the latter part of the year. That rushing attack, still strong with Braden Stubbs, but obviously losing a bit of its oomph without him. A Regina team making the move away from Peltier, and obviously with Marshall Erickson, possible Can West MVP type, running the ball for them. Behind that, great defense for them. Obviously, the reigning Hardy Cup champions having that swagger, having been here, having done that, having given Laval all they could handle in a Mitchell Bowl there afterwards. How do you play in the experience of Regina, even though they haven't looked as sharp down the stretch, with a Manitoba team that, frankly, you could say the exact same thing, that just has looked like they've kind of stumbled into the end of the Can West season here?
Well, it's very interesting because going into this, and I believe, if I remember correctly, this was the rematch of first round last year, but with the exact opposite flip, where this one was a Manitoba squad that was 7-1, and a Regina Rams squad that was 3-5 had just made it into the playoffs here, and now the shoe is on the other foot, as it were, where this Manitoba squad is the one that's reeling, and a Regina Rams squad that looks good, but is still some question marks, especially at that quarterback spot. Are we going to see Noah? Are we going to see Owen? Who's the guy going to be there? And regardless of whoever that guy is, we know for sure we're going to see one Marshall Erickson ripping this thing up and doing this thing here. Jackson Dachinsky, the first time that they played against these Rams.
I say Xander. I think I said Xander. I'm loving your McMaster Marauders these days. I'm sorry. I couldn't. My apologies. Sorry.
I'll take all the love that I can get from you right now because it doesn't come around very often for my Marauders, that's for sure. But I think Jackson Tuchinski being back in this game will change drastically what happened the first time around. Regina looked really impressive in this one, and Marshall Erickson, 165 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. It's a pretty good day for the kid. But with Jackson in the fold, with Braden Stubbs being back and healthy, what that does to their run game, if he is, man, I think that there is a lot of potential that's with this Manitoba offense in particular here. Now, they're going to need some of the very best out of their defense, and specifically out of that defensive line, regardless of who is in that quarterback. If you can limit them and if you can force them to make some mistakes, it's going to be in your best interest because at the end of the day, whether it's Noah or Owen, safe to say, if you just throw up a ball to Nicholas Surleaf, he's probably going to be able to come down with it and burn you pretty good. So I'm really interested to see how Manitoba looks against the Regina Rams squad that is operating at a very high level.
And the thing that complements Regina's rushing attack so well is the fact that on the flip side for them, and it's going to be so needed in this matchup, even like Tuchinski or no Tuchinski, because yes, as we know, Stubbs is an absolute dog back there. Is that they're the leading rush defense in all of USports right now. So that alone, I mean, for starters, like the pageantry of Erickson versus Stubbs, but then it's a Manitoba defense that on the whole has been performing well. But this Regina rush defense, and obviously, like we've talked about how great Erickson has been. We talk about how great Riker Frank is. We talk about Braden Stubbs, some of these premier running backs out of Can West. But there is part of it where, it is more of that pro style offense that we get out there. So sometimes it is just a product of, well, they're going to throw it, 35 to, 45 times a game. You just don't get the attempts to then rack up the yardage. But when you look at a team that is at its best, even with their starting quarterback in the mix, running the ball against this rush defense, and then on top of that, knowing that, again, whether it's Owen, whether it is whether it's Peltier at quarterback, it's going to start with Erickson to chew up the clock. I think it's going to be a tight matchup, but I think that you have to imagine that the favor is in the Rams. The game is favored for the Rams in this one. No.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be a closer game than it was the first time these teams played back in August, I believe. But it is going to be the Regina Rams to take this one at home. That's the Rams have been playing very well at home, and they continue that streak.
Well, then let's move over to the Huskies hosting the Thunderbirds, a matchup that, if I were to tell you going back to the start of the season that these teams would be playing in the Can West semifinal and that the quarterback matchup favors the Thunderbirds, you'd probably tell me that to stop smoking whatever I'd been smoking or taking whatever I'd been taking. But as it stands right now, unless you know anything about Anton Amendrud, certainly right now, with how well Drew Viotto's been playing for these Thunderbirds, one could even make the case. Call me crazy, but given the amount of time that Anton has missed and how hot Viotto is, even if we see Anton Amendrud's name on the depth chart matchup, you still might say that the team in terms of the quarterback play, now obviously the passing game as a whole for Saskatchewan includes the possible future MVP and possible Heck Crichton Award winner in Daniel Wiebe, your guy in Daniel Wiebe. But quarterback play alone, again, that's not nothing to say that to begin with, that with how good Viotto's been playing, you can certainly say at this point right now, going into this matchup, that you probably swing towards UBC's side from that standpoint. And quarterback is kind of an important thing in the game of football.
Yeah, just a little bit, I'd say. And this is, once again, this was the UBC team that did struggle to score against a very stout Saskatchewan defense, what was a couple of weeks ago. But this was also just a quarter from hell for the UBC squad, where Saskatchewan scored 21 points in the second quarter and then was held to, I believe, just one field goal in the second half entirely. So I think that this is, if UBC can put together a strong defensive front, and if Drew Viotto can replicate his play, what he did just last week, this is going to be a completely different game from what it was just a couple weeks ago, especially if Anton Ammerud is still not back into this game. Like I was being told, I think for this UBC game 2 weeks ago, he was on the maybe on the depth chart halfway through the week and then was taken off. So I have to imagine if he was close to coming back with their first place locked up no matter what last week anyways, that they would keep him out again to hopefully have him start and be ready to go for this upcoming week. So I'm expecting Anton to be back and ready to go for the Huskies here. But even if he is, like you mentioned, being out for what, 3 or 4 games at quarterback, that can sometimes take you a little while to get warmed up again. Though when you throw into a guy like Daniel Weave, you get warmed up pretty quick.
Absolutely. And when you can then hand it off to Riker Frank and know that you can still chunk the ball down the field, like for UBC, the thing I like, it's they're gonna have to. I mean, Zach, they're gonna have to outscore Saskatchewan to win this game. But like, I don't see them defensively. Again, all the love in the world to our guy and Kinsale Phillip, obviously, and the rest of those Thunderbirds on defense. But like, I don't think it's a realistic task to say that, and especially as you said with Anton's back, even in being a little rusty, that they're really going to have that much success slowing him down. This is a pass defense that's been able to be exposed a little bit at times. Sometimes it's just that product of, again, the same reason that maybe Regina's rush defense stats are a bit inflated because teams are just passing it more. Can West are just airing it out more across the board. Somewhat going to be reflected in that. But this passing offense for them is so strong. And so it's just going to be a day where for those Thunderbirds, for Coach Nil, they're going to have to, I think, come out swinging from the jump. And, you know, it's kind of like we talked about that in that Guelph Laurier matchup of saying, shoot, well, if Guelph falls behind, they're going to have to change their game. Like, UBC is going to play their game of, you know, putting it in Viato's hands to throw it 40 to maybe even 50 times to win or lose this game. Regardless, he is hot as anyone else, and that's what it's going to come down to. I don't think they can keep up points wise with the Saskatchewan team. And obviously that's a Huskies defense, like, as you said, has been stymieing teams, you know, somewhere in that like 15 to 20 point range on the year. I think the best that Can West has had to offer. I think they're probably a tick ahead of even Regina at this stage, sort of overall, certainly not in those rush numbers, but like, UBC is going to have to score and score often to be able to keep up with them. And I don't think they're going to be able to come through it, especially on the road with the long travel.
Yeah, I have to agree with you in this one. I just have not seen enough consistent play from the UBC Thunderbirds in order to take them over a Saskatchewan Husky team that, especially if Anton Ammerud's back, is easily the team to look at as the top tier in the Can West. So I will be taking the Huskies along with you, although I'm confident that this is going to be a phenomenal game.
It'll be electric, to say the least. Let's flip coasts and head out to the AUS. Tom, I mean, I really don't have much I want to say about St. Mary's hosting Acadia. Like, I think it's going to be a bloodbath. That St. Mary's defense is stupid good. And they've certainly proven, though, that offense needs to show a little bit more at times when they're playing the X-Men, that when it comes to playing literally anyone else in their conference, they can put up big numbers. I don't know if you have anything quickly you want to say about that matchup at all.
Yeah, just super quick. I think the messaging from Coach Samara to this Huskies team is that, yeah, you've beaten an Acadia team and they've struggled this season, but if you want to really feel good about hosting a Loney Bowl in Halifax, play to your potential. If you think that you are 50 points better than Acadia, then you better be putting up 50 points, because anything less than that, and you won't feel as confident as you will going up against either one of Bishop's or St. FX that have given you some really tight games in this season.
So let's take a look at Bishop's traveling to Antigonish to take on the X-Men. Bishop's coming off the big win against Acadia. St. FX against the tighter than the score showed, but at the same time could have been worse than the score showed outcome. If that doesn't make sense, again, go rewatch that game. It was still exciting to watch. St. Mary's defense is just absolutely nuts. Obviously, St. FX has had Bishop's number. And the thing I want to start off with is just how Quillion at the tail end of this season has really fallen off. He goes from being the guy that we assume is this sort of, you know, the betting favorite in terms of who's going to be MVP, the reigning MVP perhaps in his case, to then under 50% completion percentage in that last loss to St. Mary's, in the last loss to St. FX, and then in the win against Acadia even, he's barely over, no, sorry, he's barely over 50% completion percentage, gets a couple touchdowns to his name, but the yardage just isn't there. Again, staying as connected as we can be. I don't know if maybe it's a kind of Evan Hillock type thing and he's dealing with some injury in there. Yes, O'Shea Hosang was able to get going on the ground. Michael Nicoletta as well. But ultimately, this team's going to go as far as Quirion can take them. And given that St. FX has had their number and he's been kind of tailing of late, we kind of been saying that this is a Loney Bowl made for two, and that's St. FX and St. Mary's for a while now. Do you have any reason to believe that there's going to be any surprise in this one to take away that Loney Bowl matchup that we're expecting?
No, I think that this is going to be a St. FX win. And the only way that I'm going to feel like St. FX has a real chance against St. Mary's is if Silas Fagnon goes off in this potential win here. I mean, the last time that they played, he went 22 for 30, 231 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I think that kind of a performance to get him back on track to where we know that he can play is going to be so paramount for him to be having that confidence going into a St. Mary's team that really blanketed him the last time that they played. So I am taking the X-Men to win this one, but I really need to see Silas go off and to be confident here for me to have any reason to pick them against a St. Mary's team if that is what ends up happening in a Loney Bowl.
And obviously, Zachary Hood could still be out against St. FX in this game. Against Bishops in this one. They can pick up the win and maybe he's back that week. But I would love to be able to see the what should be a three-headed beast of a passing attack of Devin Blackwood, who's been by and away far and away their best receiving option for Fagnon on the year. Hood, who start off the year as their best option. And I know we keep going back to the name, but Josh Garnett, we've seen him perform as well as anyone seemingly as that partner in crime to Silas. But if Ben Harrington can kind of resurrect some of the, what made him and the St. FX team so special over the years, again, just kind of looking by the numbers when you think about, his day, or pardon me, the season that he's had thus far. Like, this is a guy who on the year ends up with a single touchdown, going back to that year in 2023 where they're in the national semifinal against, that's the one where they lose to Saskatchewan, right? In that tight game. He's getting 6 touchdowns on the year, about 600 yards receiving in the mix for Fagnon. And even last year where he's off the touchdown board, but he's getting 50 catches. So again, just by all accounts, participating in all these games, he's just fallen off. We know that he has the connection with Fagnon. And if, the other guys can really come to life, that rushing attack can be there. I want to see the full strength of this club so they can give that St. Mary's team a run for their money. But again, that St. Mary's team, it's their AUS to lose. Let's take a look at the RSEQ matchups that we have on our hands here. Tom, let's start off with probably the more interesting of the two games, which is McGill at Laval. Because this was a game that, the final score 43-21 when they last matched up in Montreal, doesn't take into account, or if you just look at the final score, you miss the fact that final score revolves around Laval putting up 20 in the fourth quarter, a game in which, we know that Arnaud Desjardins has been a little banged up, but a game that really not his best day, and we've seen him have some less than Arnaud Desjardins type performances on the year. We do see perhaps the best that rushing attack has showed all year this year, with Mathieu Roy really getting off. But then again, this rushing attack from McGill seemingly at any point with ELR and Jeremy Momo can strike. A really interesting matchup. The fact that it's in Quebec City, again, makes me just want to pump the brakes on any potential it's going to be an upset alert. But it kind of just feels like McGill in any game, as we've talked about, has the ability to knock off anybody, but can also lose to anybody. What do you make of this matchup here?
Yeah, I think this is a McGill squad that shows a lot of potential and a lot of promise here. I mean, with ELR and Jerry Momo alone, what they've been able to do on the run has been really incredible. And having the upset victory against Montreal and playing them even tight in where the Carabin play, Like that's a team that is showcasing that they have the ability to come up here and to do some good things. And while they did play relatively close against the Laval squad in Montreal, any team, I don't care who you are, traveling to Quebec City to play the Rouge et Or at home, that is a monumental task for you to overcome. I think you will see some good things from McGill. I think they'll show flashes of what they will continue to build on for next year. But I'm taking the Rouge et Or at home to win this one.
Most definitely. And let's go into then the game that will be out of Montreal, where the Carabins are hosting the Sting. The Stingers, Concordia, having fallen to Montreal twice on the season, a 41-14 outcome, and then a 52-2 outcome on those days. Pepe Gonzalez, as sharp as any. I mean, I think on that first game against Concordia, again, the numbers are somewhat deflated because they were going a bit back and forth with him and Charles Canard a little bit. I forget if there was like a bit of injury piece going on there, but even though he only gets 15 attempts, he's 11 for 15 with 3 touchdowns. In the second matchup, he's 12 for 16, 75% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns. Some of his better, most efficient outings that he's had, he pretty well on the whole, aside from that last outing against Laval, he's been sitting around 70% completion percentage on the year, as efficient as all heck. And when you pair that up with how good this defense is, it is a Montreal team that, I feel like kind of been under the radar a little bit, but is just obviously as strong as anyone in the RCQ right now.
Yeah, and I think that a Montreal team that, while watching them against Laval a couple weeks ago, was a little concerned about the health of one Harold Dosso. He did go down with what looked like a pretty nasty injury, but then was right up on his feet on the sidelines. I'm not 100% sure if he'll be playing in this one, but to have him back potentially going into the playoffs will be massive for them. Even if he is not back, I like this Montreal squad a lot. What Pepe Gonzalez has been doing in the back end here looks incredible. And when that's paired with a Harold Missin-led defense and they're playing at the very highest of levels, this is a tough game for anybody to play against. And while, yes, you could argue, just 2 years ago, Concordia was able to beat arguably the best defense ever, and they upset Montreal. Yeah, that was 2 years ago. The Carabins take this one in the playoffs to get into the first ever Dussault Cup.
And that'll, of course, give us the tie break, if you will, between these two clubs in Laval and Montreal, both taking a game apiece in their respective ballparks. Tom, perhaps the fastest, shortest podcast we have done in some time, in large part because there's fewer games to talk about. For other reasons, because game 3 of the World Series is going to be not tipping off. The first pitch is going to be in a little less than 20 minutes. Final thoughts going into our USports semifinals.
We've given our picks, obviously, and with the exception of one, we are the same across the board. But if there's one thing that we have learned, the more that we have been covering USports, the OUA can be at times a bit predictable with who's going to win what. But my goodness, across the league, especially in the Can West, you really don't have any idea of what's going to happen here. So I am so excited to be able to see and recap all of the games across the country. And hopefully, if the Jays can take it in less than 7, see you and me in Wind City to watch arguably the best game of the weekend here with Windsor and Queens. But regardless, I cannot wait to be breaking down all the action with you next week.
I thought you were about to do the little outro and hit the right here at the 55. Compromise to our Windsor folks. You got to tell me if it does get to a game 7, what is the best spot to be watching that, game out there? And I'll bring the old man with me and we will just party it up in Windsor, Ontario. I know y'all love the Tigers out there, but you know what? If it does get there, maybe I'll bring them with me and we'll check out the Jays hopefully raise a world championship in the Wind City, because hey, I feel like that would only bring the good juju with it being Wind City and all. But I'm right there with you, brother. Wherever we land, we'll be watching some OUA football and breaking it down in Can West and RCQ and AUS and all that good stuff, and bringing you our recap of it later on this week right here at the 55.